I'm Grady Crossland. The PowerPoint that you're about to see was put together because of my interest in the suffering and death of Jesus Christ on Calvary. In the Apostles' Creed, it reads, "Suffered under Pontius Pilate, crucified, died, and moves on." Such a brief hint of what actually transpired is remarkably inadequate to demonstrate the absolute anguish, agony, and excruciating events that surrounded Christ's death and later resurrection. I have used drawings that appear in the Journal of the American Medical Association from many years ago and other resource materials that I've had. And I've hoped that I have harmonized the Gospels to the best that I can, and that the focus is not on the entire Holy Week, but primarily on the various types of sufferings that Jesus endured.
The Passion of the Christ. A physician looks at the crucifixion. The word passion is derived from the Greek pascha, to suffer. In Christian history, it refers to Christ's last week in death. Christ is the Paschal Lamb. Foretelling by Christ. In Luke 9:21 and 22, we read, Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. And he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed on the third day and be raised to life. In Luke 9:44 and 45, it states, listen carefully to what I am about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. But they did not understand what this meant. It was hidden from them, so that they did not grasp it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. In Luke 9:51, as the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. In John 11:15 and 16, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. He is referring to Lazarus. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. In Luke 18:31 to 34, Jesus took the 12 aside and told them, we are going up to Jerusalem, and everything that is written by the prophets about the Son of Man will be fulfilled. He will be delivered over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, insult him, and spit on him. They will flog him and kill him. On the third day he will rise again. The disciples did not understand any of this. Its meaning was hidden from them, and they did not know what he was talking about. The Friday before the triumphal entry, Mary is grateful that her brother has been raised from the dead. In John 12:1 through 8, it talks about a meal at Simon the leper's house, someone who Jesus had obviously healed. At that place, Mary broke a large alabaster jar of very special perfume or spikenard. It was worth 300 denarii. The denarii was worth a day's wages, so this was basically a year's wages. Judas and other disciples questioned Jesus as to whether the spice should have been sold and used for the poor. But Jesus said, leave her alone. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. On the triumphal entry, it is Palm Sunday. Palms are a sign of honor. An ass was the mount of a king during times of peace. A war horse was used participating in battle or in celebration following a victory. An ass is appropriate for the Prince of Peace. Jerusalem, normally a city of 50,000 inhabitants, probably has 250,000 people in town to celebrate the Passover. A crowd is following Jesus from Bethany, and another crowd has come out of Jerusalem to see the man who raised Lazarus from the dead. The title Jesus of Nazareth signifies his humanity. In Jericho, the crowd said Jesus of Nazareth was coming, but the blind man called out, Son of David, and Jesus stopped to heal him. Son of Man, Son of David, The King who comes in the name of the Lord, all signify deity. The Pharisees present tell him to rebuke his disciples. Jesus tells him the stones would speak out if he did. Some Pharisees chastise others for their ineptitude to quell this regal entry into the city and exclaim, "Look, the world has gone after him." On Monday, he goes head to head with the elders. The temple was a racket, money changers with iffy scales, priests supervising whether animals were truly clean, even being used as a shortcut to get where you were going. People would go through the court of the Gentiles. On Tuesday, we find in Mark 11, the scribes and chief priests sought how they might destroy him because all the multitude was astonished at his teaching. The, quote, "by what authority do you preach," unquote, is countered by the John the Baptist question. The elders fear being stoned by the populace and will not answer Jesus' question regarding John's baptism. The Jewish leaders are trying to entrap Jesus while Jesus is trying to teach a large crowd in the temple. It is a very distracting maneuver and had to be irritating to Jesus. They also challenge Jesus as to what is owed Caesar. If Jesus is a revolutionary, perhaps they can use that against him. He tells the Sadducees that they are wrong about the resurrection. He also traps the Jewish leaders with another riddle. In Matthew 22, verses 45 and 46, if David, referring to King David, then calls him Lord, how is he his son? And no man was able to answer him in a word, neither did any man from that day forward ask him any more questions. How to win friends. Jesus uses thinly veiled parables to describe what awaits the Pharisees. Jesus reaffirms the Shema, the greatest commandment. There are a litany of accusations, and you know that this was given in front of the crowds and would have infuriated the Pharisees when he labels them with all of these different titles and concludes by asking them, how are they going to escape being sentenced to hell? And influencing people. In Matthew 26:2, ye know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified. The scribes, the chief priests, the elders of the people met at the palace of the high priest Caiaphas and plotted to take Jesus by craft or trickery to kill him. But they wanted to not do it on the feast day as to avoid an uproar of the people. There were some leaders who believed but would not go public for fear of the other leaders. At the same time, Jesus is telling his disciples about the destruction of Jerusalem to come, the tribulation and the parousia, his second coming, on the Mount of Olives. Wednesday, early in the morning, all the people came to him in the temple to hear him. This is also the day Judas Iscariot most likely struck his deal with the chief priest to betray Jesus. On Thursday, we have Christ's Passover dinner. He has a long discourse and prayers that are recorded in the Gospel of John. The sequence is basically his betrayer is identified, he washes the feet of the disciples, and then while he has taken this role of a servant, he has to listen to the argument of who among his disciples will be the greatest. At this time, he also foretells Peter's denial, and they closed with a hymn and headed to the Mount of Olives. You can count on your buddies. A maxim of mine is your friend is someone you can call at 3 a.m. and ask them to come to you, and they will do that as quickly as they can without asking you why. Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, and there he is looking at his situation that's to occur over the next few hours, and it is so stressful that he actually sweats blood. The terms are hematidrosis and hemohydrosis. These phenomena are recorded in medical literature, always associated with extreme stress. Luke records that he was strengthened by an angel at this time, and he was asking his disciples who were away, but he asked 3 in particular to be close by, a stone's throw away, and asked them to pray for him. He goes and checks on them, and they are asleep. He wakes them and chastises them. He goes and prays some more. He comes back, they're asleep again. He goes and prays a 3rd time, and at that time the mob comes to get him, and he goes and wakes them just to make them aware of that. So there he is in the most extreme situation of recognizing what's before him, and his disciples just don't get it. The arrest, it occurs at night, which is unusual, and it is a mob with swords and staves. It is said that it is a band or cohort. A cohort was 1/10 of a legion, which would typically be 400 to 600 soldiers. Jesus comes forward to meet them. The mob consisted of the Jewish leadership, temple guards, and Roman guards. "Whom do you seek?" Jesus asked of the leaders. "Jesus of Nazareth," is their reply. "I am he," is his reply. They fall to the ground. In a sense, they bow to the king. This is only recorded in the Gospel of John. Jesus heals the cut-off ear of Malchus, servant of the high priest. Jesus' disciples flee to safety as Jesus had planned. In the other Gospels, it is Judas kissing Jesus. Judas calls him Rabbi, not Lord. Rabbi just means teacher or esteemed one. The other disciples at the Lord's Supper had referred to Jesus as Lord. A kiss could be a formal greeting or a sign of affection. And then Jesus allows himself to be bound when he states that he could call on a dozen legion of angels. That would be 72,000 angels had he chosen. The arrest is such a miscarriage of justice because Jewish law forbade any arrest at night, convening of the court at night, meeting held anywhere other than the temple, a closed meeting, it must be open to the public, the acceptance of a confession without corroboration, and you were not allowed to ask the accused to testify against themselves. The other requirements of the law include that the sentence of guilty must not be unanimous. That's a sign of prejudice or simply being bloodthirsty. A guilty sentence could only be handed down after a night of fasting and prayer. That was obviously abrogated at this point. And there must be an interval of 3 days between judgment and execution of the sentence. And for the Romans, it required 10 days. From midnight to 0600, Jesus is taken to Annas, whose name means Jehovah is gracious. It is there that for the first time Jesus is struck for impertinent speech to Annas, is the accusation. He is pronounced guilty of blasphemy at Caiaphas' house for acknowledging to be the Son of God. It is during this time that he is going to hear the cock crow, which is not necessarily a hen or chicken family member, but simply a trumpet that shows when the shift is to change in the Roman guard. So there was a second trial at dawn that had the quorum. It's also during this time that not only does Peter deny Jesus 3 times, but Judas Iscariot is most likely to commit suicide during this period of time. The Sanhedrin consisted of 70 members, 23 each of elders, priests, and scribes, and then the high priest. And while he was there, he initially remained silent, which fulfills prophecy. that he doesn't defend himself. But when the high priest asks, "Are you the Christ?" Jesus answers, "I am." So he is accused of blasphemy, and a death decree is issued. But only the Roman procurator can pronounce a death sentence. Jesus is spat upon, his head is covered while he is being struck by fists, and he is challenged to prophesy as to who struck him, since he can't see them. Then he goes before Pontius Pilate, and again he is bound for this. It seems sort of ludicrous when you have such huge numbers surrounding him that they would find it necessary to tie his hands while they lead him out. Now, he also does not answer Pilate initially. Jesus explains his kingship, but Pilate doesn't get it. Pilate does figure out, though, that Jesus does not deserve the death penalty. The back and forth between Pilate and the Jewish leaders is great drama. What ensues is almost a tennis match between Pilate and the Jewish leaders, with Jesus' life in the balance as they go back and forth from "ball's in your court, now mine." Pilate asks, "What charge do they have against Jesus?" They reply to the effect of, "Just get on with it. We know what we are doing." Pilate responds, "Then do it yourself." And the Jews can't. "We need the death penalty." Pilate, "Then tell me what he has done." Jews give 3 answers. The second one, that Jesus refuses to pay tribute to Caesar, is a bald-faced lie, because we saw what happened earlier in the week in the temple. It was well witnessed as to Jesus' response. Pilate then, in learning that Jesus was Galilean, hopes to bail out via Herod. When he gets to Herod, Jesus is mocked and dressed in a royal robe because, A, he refuses to respond to Herod, and Herod is looking for a miracle just to be entertained. So he's back to Pilate. Pilate recognizes the envy of the Jewish leaders, but keeps calling him King of the Jews to rub it in. But he knows they may report him if he does not give in to them. Pilate tries to release Jesus, but the crowd clamors for Barabbas, whose name means son of the father or son of a rabbi. What irony that they're going to release Barabbas, who instead of Jesus. Pilate, who's a superstitious man, gets word that his wife has had a dream and tells Pilate to have nothing to do with this righteous man. So now Pilate offers him Barabbas, who's accused of sedition, murder, and robbery, or Jesus. They choose Barabbas and call for the crucifixion of Jesus. The last time before Pilate is around 0900. Pilate has Jesus scourged. After scourging Jesus, the soldiers mock him with a reed scepter and a crown of thorns and a robe. They call him King of the Jews, and they strike him as well. Jesus was then shown to the crowd in a purple robe, the royal color, and the crown of twisted thorns. In this condition, Jesus cannot possibly be a threat to the Jewish leaders. This is the moment of the famous ecce homo, that Pilate washes his hands and says, "Jesus' blood is on your hands," and they reply, "On us and on our children." Pilate still finds Jesus without crime and wants to release him. The mob still is crying, "Crucify him." Pilate gets a broadside when the high priest states that Jesus claims to be the Son of God. Pilate has another powwow with Jesus as to where is he from, or who exactly is he? Remember, Pilate is a superstitious man. This is Pilate's last stand. The Jewish leaders remind him that to allow another king would make Pilate no friend of Caesar, and that they themselves serve no king but Caesar. With those trump cards on the table, Pilate turns Jesus over to be crucified. Now, awake for 24 hours, he has walked approximately 2 miles in the last 9 hours. A procurator is required to pass the death sentence outside of Italy. Pilate finds no basis for a charge against Jesus. Scourging. Jesus is whipped with a flagrum until his muscles and bones showed. It fulfills the prophecy of Psalms 22:17. I can count all my bones. People stare and gloat over me. He is then led to Golgotha. He's now been awake for 24 hours, has walked 2 miles in the last 9 hours. He is accompanied by a quaternium. It is 5 soldiers. There are 4 in a square guarding the prisoner, and the lead soldier carried a titulus. A centurion, which is a significant rank, called a carnifexarum, was in charge. Carnifexarum can literally be translated executioner with a post. That would be the patibulum. There was a sign called a titulus written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. Interestingly, not Aramaic, the common spoken language of the day. The letters that are seen are I-N-R-I. Think of the I in Latin as a J, and so it's an abbreviation for Jesus of Nazareth, Rex, Jews, Rex being king. So Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Simon of Cyrene ends up carrying the patibulum to the actual crucifixion site. Cyrene was a 1 mile square city in North Africa. It was very modern with active commerce. Crucifixion. History. We know that crucifixion occurred as early as 1000 BC in Persia. In Deuteronomy 21:23, there was the instruction that a body shall not remain overnight on the tree, but you shall surely bury him that day, so that you do not defile the land which the Lord your God is giving you. In 519 BC, Darius crucified 3,000 Babylonians. Crassus crucified 6,000 slaves at the Spartacus uprising. Alexander the Great crucified 2,000 at Tyre. Titus crucified 500 Jews a day for several months at the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. The Austrian-Hungarian army utilized crucifixion as a punishment for deserters and cowards in World War I, and Germany utilized it in the Dachau concentration camp in World War II. By 100 BC, it was an official Roman punishment limited to slaves, foreigners, and Romans convicted of sedition. It did not have to be a fatal sentence. It was designed to be humiliating and often combined with scourging. Outside of Italy, the pronouncement of a procurator such as Pontius Pilate was required. A centurion supervised the event. Roman historians described it as most painful, most shameful, abhorrent, worse than being burned alive or eaten by wild beasts. The term that's now used to describe unbearable pain is excruciating, ex-crux, from the cross. The parts of a cross consist of the patibulum, which is the crossbar, which is what the prisoner carried to the site of crucifixion. The stipes was the pole to which the patibulum was attached. The settle was a sitting rest. Seneca records that the settle was sometimes designed to impale the victim's genital area. The supedium was a footrest, could be used if someone wanted to prolong the suffering. Insects and birds could feast on the victims. There were several types of crosses. The most common that's seen in art is that of the Latin cross. The tau was very, very common. And the patibulum fit into a groove of the stipes or was fastened to it. The most common cross used in the Mideast was the tau, T-A-U, or T cross. The stipes was laid upon the ground, and the patibulum was then placed on top to create a T. The victim this was on the ground. The victim was nailed or tied to the cross, and then the cross raised to its position. The cross most commonly seen in artistic renditions of the events is that of the Latin cross. In that case, the stipes was again laid on the ground. The patibulum was attached. The victim was again nailed or tied to the cross.
the Latin cross might have a sedile, which is the area where the buttocks could rest, often though it was designed to inflict pain on the genital area, and a supinium, which is an area where you could rest your feet, which allowed you to push up to breathe more easily if you wanted to crucify someone for several days.
The hands to the patibulum. The earliest Gospels still extant were originally written in Greek. The word translated for hand from the Greek includes the wrist. Note now this demonstration of the nails.
This is a replica of a Roman nail of the period in which Christ was crucified. You can see the length, and you can see that it was placed in the wrist area, and you can see that driven in how far it could go in order to sustain the weight of an individual.
The nail placement would have to be more in the wrist in order to support the weight. A pathologist in Paris took cadaveric upper extremities and placed a nail through the wrist into a board with the extremity hanging below. The nail would not tear through the hand when 40-kilogram weights were attached to the dangling extremity. This means two arms could sustain 80 kilograms of stress. The average man of that age only weighed 60 kilograms.
This nail would be used for the feet. Often the feet were crossed one on top of another, and a single nail was driven into the foot below the ankle, through one foot, through the other foot, and then into the stipes. Also, at other times, as seen on the drawing, the feet were put lateral to the stipes, and a nail could be driven in laterally to the medial component and into the stipes. These nails were made for me by Peter Christian, an artist at University of Arkansas's Little Rock.
Respiration. Expiration is compromised over time. A significant effort is required to elevate oneself in order to exhale. Shoulders would often become dislocated over time. A scourged, raw, bleeding back would rub against the stipes as the effort to lift oneself was made. Feet to side of stipes, potentially prolonged death. The Roman Catholic seminary experience is where students volunteered to be tied. They had their blood pressure monitored, their heart rate monitored. They were very uncomfortable in 50 to 30 minutes. Notice that they're just simply bound. There are no nails that are used. If you did not have support, you would typically die within 2 to 3 hours. If you were able to push up, you could last many hours or even days. Breaking of the legs. Latin term is curifragium, the Greek is scalopopia, and it hastened death because you couldn't push to lift your weight up. The soldiers would break the tibia and fibula between the knee and the ankle of both legs. That way the victim could no longer push up to breathe. This doesn't happen to Jesus, but he does get pierced with a spear to fulfill two prophecies. One, not one of his bones shall be broken, from Psalms 34 to 20. And from Zechariah 12:10, they shall look upon him whom they pierced. Christ's crucifixion from sometime around 9 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We notice that when he first arrives that he abstains from the wine and myrrh, which would be a mild analgesic mixture. He will suffer the full brunt of this sentence. The soldiers throw lots for his clothes. That fulfills prophecy. He is in view of his mother and disciples, and he is naked throughout this event. The Jewish leaders are having a field day with their taunting. And then at noon, darkness envelops the, quote, whole land, unquote. Some translators use whole earth. In AD 33, there was an eclipse in the Holy Land at 6:22 p.m., but this probably does not apply to this event. Phlegon, who is quoted by both Origen and Eusebius, reports an eclipse of 3 hours. The stars appeared at a full moon. There would be a full moon at Passover. In an Alexandria classroom in Egypt, the teacher said, quote, either the earth is coming to an end or a god has died, unquote. Theologians speculate as to whether it is dark. Scripture associates sin with darkness because the Christ has assumed the sin of the world and the Father hides himself from the view. Is his suffering increased by being naked and cold at this point? Matthew records an earthquake, curtain tearing to separate the Holy of Holies, and that people came out of tombs. Mark also includes the temple curtain being torn in two. So there is no need for any further sacrificial events to occur in the temple in the future. There are 7 sayings of Christ on the cross. The first, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That shows that this is in spite of the Jewish leaders continuing to mock him. The second, verily I say unto you, thou shalt be with me in paradise. This is spoken to the criminal who asked to be with Jesus in the future, so Christ is still saving. Woman, addressed to Mary his mother, behold thy son, that's the Apostle John, and to Apostle John, behold thy mother. So even in his extremis, he is caring for his mother. And then, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's from the opening line of Psalm 22, a messianic psalm. The bearer of sin is forsaken by a holy God. Habakkuk 1:13. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong. I thirst. Psalm 69, my throat is dry. Christ Jesus is fully human. He does take some sour wine at this point. He needs to clear dried saliva from his hard palate in order to speak aloud. This is lifted up to him via a hyssop reed, which is approximately 20 inches. That would indicate that he was probably on a 7-foot cross. And then it is said, it is finished. He knows the end point. This is a cry of victory. And only John says at that point, in bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. In Luke, we have a reference to Psalms 31:5. Into thine hand I commit my spirit. Thou hast redeemed me, O Lord God of truth. And that is the last saying. The death of cross. There's no recording of his having received any food or liquid since the Last Supper. He has lost several units of blood by scourging. How much fluid did he lose from exertion carrying the cross, trying to breathe on the cross, etc.? Did he die from hypoxia or hypercarbia, too little oxygen or too much carbon dioxide? Both usually sink into unconsciousness prior to dying. Or, as is recorded, did he simply actively dismiss his spirit and die? He gave up his life at the time he chose by his own active will. In John 10, verse 18, he states, no one takes it, that is his life, from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This command I have received from my Father. After he dies, the centurion remarks, surely this was the Son of God. It's recorded in Luke 23, verse 48, and all the multitudes who assembled to see the sight, when they saw what had taken place, returned home beating their breast. Beating one's breast is a sign of profound grief. The festival had become a tragedy. So the summary, how many times did he tell his disciples what was going to happen, and they never got it, even up to 2 days before the Passover? He mentors and invests in them for 3 years, and in the end, he is alone. He is betrayed by one of the 12, and with something as intimate as a kiss. He is physically exhausted. He has been physically abused. He has been emotionally abused. Even a criminal with whom he is crucified gives him grief. the extreme physical punishments of scourging and crucifixion he has endured, the humility of mocking and nakedness. And remember that nakedness was a big part of the shaming process. He could have called upon legions of angels at any time, but he didn't. The atonement. The Latin verb propitiare, which means to appease, and expiation is to erase. Christ propitiates and expiates your sin. He doesn't simply erase it. He propitiates, i.e., he pays for it. That's the sense of your being redeemed. What is the cost of this? Your redemption required the Lamb without blemish, the man without sin. And to fulfill the Old Testament law, it required the spilling of blood. Those of you who are saved by the death and resurrection of Christ are saved by grace, not any work of your own. And it is not grace cheaply obtained. It is the gift of the perfect Son of Man by his own choice to undergo the horror necessary to redeem us from our sinful state. Do not love the praise of men more than praise from God. John 12:43.